Hello and welcome to the CX Files for October 17th, 2024. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan, back in Montreal. Mark, I cannot believe that it's the 17th of October, as you and I were just musing about before we hit the record button to do the intro for this podcast. Less at this point, I think less than 3 weeks away from the US election, which is certainly, I think, going to be watched by so many people, not just stateside, but around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just 20 days to go now as we record, which I think is the day before publishing this podcast. So yeah, it's less than 3 weeks to go, and everything seems to be on a knife edge. So who knows what's going to happen there.
And speaking of knife edges, we're roughly about 4 to 5 weeks away from the American Thanksgiving, where there's going to be a lot of knives cutting into a lot of turkey over the course of the holiday weekend, not to mention Black Friday coming up, which is one of the biggest customer experience periods over the course of the 12-month period in the United States.
Well, Q4 is always a big deal for so many industries. Certainly, if you're looking at people going out and enjoying themselves, then hospitality goes crazy at this time of year, along with retail, e-commerce. Everybody's buying presents and everyone's trying to take advantage of the sales. So, we always see at this time of year the top 5 tips for how your customer service team can manage Black Friday. And it just seems to be a recurring story every year.
Yeah, it's a recurring story every year, and there's also recurring stories about many, many CX fails. So unfortunately, it seems that there's a lot of organizations that aren't following those top 5 tips. Maybe they should cop on this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't you introduce our guest for this week? Because I know it's one of your interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really, really excited to catch up with a longtime friend of the podcast. Now, the gentleman who I caught up with was the one and only Neal Topf. Now, Neal is the founder and the managing director of Callzilla, which is, I would say, an upstart BPO provider. Neal's based in Florida, but he does have capacity in the American nearshore in a site in Colombia as well as in South Africa. And the reason I caught up with Neal, Mark, was because a few weeks ago, he put something on LinkedIn, and he always has very good content, always substantial stuff that he posts on LinkedIn regarding an interaction he'd had with a prospective client, that after he had shown what the company could do, after he talked about the technology backbone, after he talked a little bit about the capabilities, the prospective client said, I want to get to know you. I want to get to know your team. I want to see what's under the hood. Let's develop a rapport. Let's see what we can do here. And that really ties into that issue of company culture. And one of the things that I've been talking a lot about this year, whether it's on the CX Files or on my blog, it's about the extent to which company culture is really bubbling under the surface as a key determinant of what buyers are looking for in a BPO partner. And Neal was really fortunate, I think, from our standpoint, we were very fortunate to get Neal's insight and to talk a little bit about what he, as an outsourcing operator, is bringing to the table in terms of culture, and how he sees culture really coming to the surface, again, to use a cliche, as a key buying factor when it comes to what an enterprise is looking for in an outsourcing partner.
I think that this is an interesting topic. And in fact, I was having a long conversation with someone else in this industry yesterday, just about this how differentiation between BPO providers. I know that quite often we differentiate on their size. So you have the giants or the small agile guys. But often, they're similar prices, providing similar services with similar ideas, and it can be quite hard to differentiate what they're doing. And so, something like culture, actually feeling that this is a team that you can get along with and get along with for the long term, really does come out. When comparing companies.
Yeah, and I think something to keep in mind about culture is that it is relatively agnostic when it comes to the size of the organization. Mark, you and I have both been to see global contact center outsourcing operators in different sites around the world, and they've got an incredibly warm culture that's consistent across different countries and different continents. You can get smaller organizations that have the same dynamic. Equally speaking, you can find organizations, BPOs of all sizes, that might not necessarily have a great culture or a warm culture or a consistent one. So, from my standpoint, this as a differentiator really counts. And it was great to get Neal's thoughts in regards to how he's positioning both his own services, both his own company, as well as the culture that you can find within the Callzilla operations as one of those key differentiators as he looks to try and win new clients and retain current ones.
Well, they always say that culture comes from the top, so it's certainly good to hear directly from the boss.
Exactly. So on that note, why don't we swing down to hear my chat with Neal Topf from Callzilla? The CX Files is really pleased this week to welcome a friend of the podcast, and I believe a first-time guest in the form of Neal Topf, who is the president of Callzilla. He joins us from his home in Florida. Neal, great to see you.
Peter, thank you so much for having me. I am a long-time follower, first-time guest, as they say on sports radio here in the U.S. Long-time, first-time. It's a privilege and an honor. Long-time, first-time.
Well, the privilege and the honor is ours, and we've been meaning to get you on the pod for a while, and we found a really good reason to do so. But before we get into that, Neal, I'd love it if you could maybe take 30 seconds or so and describe Callzilla. For those who might not be familiar with your organization, maybe talk to us a little bit about what Callzilla is, what you do, and where you're based.
Sure, thank you. I am the president and co-founder of Callzilla. We are an outsourced contact center, also referred to by others as a BPO, or also referred to others as an entity that competes in the GBS or Global Business Services sector. Depends on what your acronym of choice is. We're headquartered in the state of Florida in the US. We mainly serve North America, but we also serve Europe, Latin America, and Asia. We are one of these organizations that is located onshore, yet operates from nearshore and offshore, which for us means we operate from nearshore Colombia in South America and offshore South Africa. And we'll see next time we get to chat if there'll be a third location. And I have relied heavily on your writing and research and analysis, Peter. They've helped guide me in making choices and decisions and benchmark and things like that. But anyway, we are what some refer to as a boutique contact center. And I really like that term because we are not the global footprint people. We don't have a shop in every market. We don't want to do that. That's not us. We are a more nimble, agile, and smaller shop that I think and hope after 19 years of being able to prove the model that we deliver very high quality in our performance, our results, the way we manage customer experience and employee experience. And that has translated into being able to be competitive in a very, very complex environment, ever-changing environment over the last 19 years.
Well, that's a great overview, Neal. Thank you so much. And thank you for the kind words about the work that we do here at Ryan Strategic Advisory. So let's dive into the topic at hand. And that is the catalyst, shall we say, about why I reached out to you so that we could launch this podcast discussion. Now, Neal, you're very active on LinkedIn, much like myself and much like many people in our space. But what I love about what you post is it's thought-provoking. And something really jumped out at me 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now, you posted an article that was highlighting a client visit, and it was highlighting a discussion that you'd have with the client. And I believe that you were taken aback by the fact that after you'd pitched to the client a little bit about the capabilities and the technologies that Callzilla brings to the table, the client asked you to talk a little bit about yourselves, to talk about yourself. And I really thought that was fascinating because it's something that we're starting to hear more and more about, this level of engagement that clients are looking for. Can you describe in your own words how this came about and how it played out for the listening audience?
Sure. I'm just really happy that you actually read what I wrote. I never know when you hit the publish button whether anyone's going to read it or not, or people just skip over it. So it's nice to know that it resonated with somebody. I appreciate that. I really do. Yeah, so the way one engages with clients in this world has changed so much since the pandemic, right? We used to be able to count on maybe a quarterly visit to a site, or if we were being evaluated for our services prior to pulling a trigger and signing a contract, they would come and do a site visit. We would spend time with them one-on-one in person. We'd get to know each other a bit more, and we would have done a PowerPoint, an elaborate PowerPoint of an hour and a half with 600 slides. And, it might have been casualties along the way of people falling asleep, but we would have done it and probably hammered a client to death over that thing. The world obviously changed. People's attentions are a lot shorter. People want very simple, easy to digest bits of content and information that they don't have to read and spend hours over. I had the great opportunity with a site visit and visit in our building in Colombia by an important client of ours that had engaged us for one certain type of service, a very kind of narrow thing. And they gave us the opportunity. They asked that great question. So tell us a little bit more about you. What else could we do here? And my first temptation was, my reaction might have been like, oh my God, I got to get and do the 30-second elevator speech, but I knew I wouldn't do it in 30 seconds. I would just do it in probably 7 or 8 minutes, and I would bore that person to death, and I didn't want to do that. What I think was intelligent that I did was I had already heard and applied what I had listened to from this leader of what they're going through in their current world, what types of headaches, what types of challenges, what types of problems they're going through. And I was able to tailor the message to that. I think I did this strategically and intelligently. I think I knew what he needed to hear. I didn't bore him with, trying to synthesize, like I said, 60 pages of PowerPoint into 30 seconds or less. I was able to tailor the message, but I was really grateful to be given the opportunity. Sometimes that's all it takes. Listen to what they're going through, tailor the message to that. And when I was communicating the ideas, I saw the light bulb over his head go off. I did it right that time, but all you have to do is afford the opportunity to speak a little bit, tailor the message, hopefully tailor it to what you think they want and need to hear. And if there's a match between what they need in their work world and their challenges to a solution that we can provide, that's, I think, how I did that successfully.
Well, it sounds very much like you did do it successfully, and it touches on something that's interesting, Neal, that I've been picking up on for some months now. As you mentioned, post-pandemic, the dynamic is really changing between the client on the enterprise side and the outsourcer. And something that I'm noticing is that the level of engagement is no longer a horizontal one where they're asking, please explain the ecosystem of different services and technologies that you provide, almost like on a linear scale. The clients are actually looking for depth now. They're looking for a rapport. They're looking for a relationship that is going to be a lot more substantial than one that might have been perhaps more transactional pre-pandemic. What do you put this down to?
It's so accurate. So 2 years ago, this is 2024. When did I see you in Munich? It's not in Munich, in Glasgow. Glasgow was last year, 23, right?
2023, yeah.
So 2023, of all the great sessions, this was a theme in several of them. And there was one particular session on the first day that gave research to put meat on the bones around what you just described. And I learned from that session. And the session talked exactly about this, not only building rapport, but being the partner in things like digital transformation, updating and iterating around process, solving for solutions, no longer being transactional, but having the relationship of trust where we are brought in not to charge for the quote unquote butts in seats, but to provide solutions. The session that you was at that first day in Glasgow also talked about a change in the economic model. And that really resonated with me. I had light bulbs go off over my head thinking like, wait a minute, I can transcend and alter the way we charge and create new revenue streams around solutions, not just the old way of charging butts and seats. It's no longer transactional. It is relationship where we start to have more as the BPO provider. We're no longer just the vendor. We're actually become a partner and have, I'm not going to say always equal footing, but it starts to be a much more level playing field in what we are allowed to do and the value we're hopefully allowed to propose and offer.
But this brings up, I think, a very, very important element, because what we're talking about here is, as we try and look towards these relationships, they're going to be much more based on, I would say, a much thicker foundation. Realistically, that means the potential for an outsourcer, if they do this well, from the pitch all the way through to carrying out the work and the execution, that means longer partnerships. That means longer term revenue streams, and quite frankly, less disruption for the enterprise, because they aren't going to be churning their providers as much.
Absolutely correct. So I heard I actually led a panel at an event a couple of weeks ago, and I interviewed on the panel a leader of a contact center operation who has, I think she said, 4 BPO partners. And she gave the example that she speaks in her personal time to her spouse, and the only other people she speaks to that she has on speed dial are her 4 BPO partners. It is that level of importance of relationship that the BPO partner has. And you're right. Once you've achieved trust, consistent results, performance, quality, once the buyer believes in you, absolutely, you become more ingrained in the operation. You become more trusted to perform not just the basic tasks of charging per hour per agent, but actually creating solutions and working around KPIs and being incented sometimes to be able to perform greater in certain metrics. And you're right, it also translates into potentially longer contracts and longer relationships, but also additional ways to offer services and charge for those. I have a great example of a client for whom we charge butts and seats or per agent per hour, but we also charge for something called analytics as a service. We also charge for something called agent assist as a service. We have another thing called voice of agent. We don't happen to charge for that one, but that's a whole different service that's out of the traditional scope of things that we do. It's value that we hopefully add, that our client believes that it's worth paying for, and it's a new revenue stream. It's a wonderful new model to transcend and get out of the old way and into the new way of thinking and focused around solutions.
So really, I think if an outsourcer is going to get to that point where they're going to be able to deliver these value add elements, and I think the value add comes intrinsically with the trust that they build up with the enterprise. I mean, obviously, the more value add a service provided, the more the enterprise is going to be trusting the BPO partner. So, Neal, from your perspective, as we're in this new reality post-pandemic, as outsourcers are looking to try and rethink how they pitch business, what are some of the sea changes that a BPO will have to think about when they're going to win a new contract, or when they're going to speak to an enterprise they might not necessarily have had an interaction with before? How does the strategy commercially have to change in order to get through the door to do some of these services?
It's exactly the question we've been asking ourselves over the last couple of years, and that I'm going to harp back to it. Began to actually hear some answers in Atlanta this year. The idea of the BPO no longer throwing spaghetti at the wall to seeing what sticks, meaning saying that we are one shop fits all, one size fits all. We offer all the services to all the verticals, to all the communication channels. That's, for lack of a better word, maybe it's I was going to say it's BS, but I don't know if the listeners will appreciate that. But it's not necessarily authentic. We need to, as BPO and service providers, need to know what we're good at, where we have expertise, where we have specialty, where we have know-how, where we can add value, and at the same time know where we can't, and know where we don't have experience and what verticals we shouldn't offer and try to compete in. So we have started to niche down. That seems to be one of the common phrases to describe it, niching down and really tailoring the content and the offering and the services and how we prospect and with whom we target and with whom we speak to be able to support and show. These are the not 35 industries that we serve, but it's maybe now 5 or 6. And this is where we really have an experience set, and the work that we've done and the clients we've served and the outcomes we've achieved and the solutions we've created and the strategies we've come up with. I think when you can do that, all of a sudden a prospective buyer looks at you in a different way and looks at you in a way that's perhaps more evenly, more equally, rather than just looking at you as the lowly BPO person that's coming in prospecting and knocking on their door, because that buyer typically is getting dozens of calls every week, month, or quarter from someone who says they do the exact same thing that we do.
Yeah, and I love that expression, niching down, because I've been a big believer in subject matter expertise and having a much deeper level of skill set across maybe a few different silos, as opposed to a moderate or a shallow set of skill sets across several or a dozen. To my mind, it's that level of subject matter expertise that's really going to drive new contracts, new deals, and new opportunities. But something else, Neal, that has really come up as a bit of a watchword in the industry the last little while, and certainly there was a light bulb moment for me. I've talked about it on the pod before, and it was when I was over in the UK doing a presentation to a group of about 100 enterprise buyers for the CCMA, Lee Hopwood's organization. And one of the things that jumped out at me was the extent to which, when I presented a slide that was identifying what key selection criterion were for enterprises to pick a BPO partner, everybody shot their hands up and said, "You're missing one. You're missing one. You're missing one." I'm like, "Oh, how could I be missing one? I'm supposed to be the expert here." And I asked, "Okay, what am I missing?" And they said, "Culture, a congruent culture, a warm culture." And from the standpoint of your experience, to what extent is culture of Callzilla or BPOs in general being prioritized by the prospective buying community?
That is such a great question, and it's so relevant in my day-to-day. All right, I'm going to tell a story. Let's see. The outcome of this story may be different mid next week, but I'll tell you going into this. So we have a presentation with a buyer next week. We presented an RFP, and they've asked us a ton of questions, not necessarily about culture, but they've asked about team. They've asked about who makes up the team, what's their background. Diversity, equity, inclusion is a very important thing for them. And so I have a choice when we do our presentation to the client or to the prospect. Should I be the one that's speaking, or should I actually let the team speak? Because I want to show that as a team, as a culture, teamwork, collaboration, diversity of our team is important, experience of our team is important. And I think that walking the walk that I have talked in a document, but showing it and being able to show that here we are, we're diverse, we're young and hungry. Neal is not dominating this is not a CEO driven company. It is a team driven culture where employee experience matters, where the development and learning of our team members matters, where our clients are going to interact with our team because our team matters because they have a seat at the table. That's something I learned as critical part of culture in an overall CX strategy, the importance of employee experience. If you don't have that, you don't have culture. And so you're right. We are going to try to feature culture as we move forward and have these interactions with prospective buyers, that we walk the talk. Employee experience matters. It's critical to what we do and how we compete. It's one thing I think that if we do it well, it helps us stand out. Culture is actually critical, and yes, it does eat strategy for breakfast.
So in that case, then, Neal, if you're putting yourself in the shoes of an enterprise, if you're a procurement manager or a CX manager for a business in whatever vertical, or if you're giving these individuals advice, what would you say some of the red flags they should be looking out for when it comes to BPO's culture or lack thereof? What should they be anticipating a BPO will bring to the table? And what are some of the elements that a BPO, quite frankly, should not be bringing in that they should be watching out for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that one thing absolutely to look out for is attrition, agent and employee attrition, client attrition. Ask questions about how many clients have you lost? Why have you lost them? Same question for your agents. If you have the opportunity as a prospective buyer and you're on site, go do a focus group with the agents and some team members. Ask them, and ask the Neals of the world to leave the room and have a one-on-one session with individual agents or groups of agents and team members, and you'll get a flavor. They will get the flavor of what's going on. I think that's one important thing. Another important thing is geography. Geography is always important. I think that as the playing field for talent continues to level out and even out in so many different parts of the world, geography isn't as critical as it once was because of the level of English and experience in BPO is out there. But I think not enough enterprises pay attention and understand, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, the nature of political risk, currency risk, financial risk, and understand and do your due diligence what country or markets you would be operating in and what that impact has on your business. How easy is it to hire? How easy is it to fire? How exposed or not would I be to currency risk? What are the labor regulations in how I structure my shifts, and how easy is it to let someone go or ask them if the peaks of the volume have subsided, if I need to reassign them to a different shift? How easy and fluid is it to do business contact center wise in an individual country? I think those are two things that are often overlooked. Absolutely, of course, culture matters. But if I were to get granular, like I said, I would look at attrition. I would look at some of the political and financial things of the market or markets that the service would be delivered from.
Okay, super duper. Well, Neal Topf from Callzilla, thank you so much for your time today. This has been enlightening, and for the listeners who aren't aware of it, which I'm guessing most of them, I always enjoy my conversations with Neal because we really get into the weeds. And Neal, you bring a very unique perspective, and I think a very fresh perspective to our sector. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the readers or listeners for listening. And hopefully we can get someone that likes it and forwards it and shares it. And I would love to answer any questions if anyone had any. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, and I always appreciate the opportunity to engage with you, to participate in your events, to learn from you, read your research and your white papers, and you're a source of knowledge for me. Thank you so much, Peter.
Oh, thanks to you, my friend.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.